I'm Darim, Rahmatallah. I'm from the UK. I'm part of the product management team. I have been involved in some form or another with what we call enterprise licensing for the better part of 14 years. I've had exposure from many, many different angles, from support, from sales, from product management. I'm going to talk to you today about flexible licensing, but I'm not going to talk to you about it from a process perspective. I'm not going to talk to you about it from a business aspect. It's going to be more looking at the technological aspect. So it's really what the capabilities are in our technology that allow you to implement flexible licensing. Any questions, please just call them out mid-session. Let's try and keep this nice and dynamic. Couple of slides at the beginning that I'll skip over relatively quickly just to kind of, put the thought in the, just to get the thought going really. So you're wondering what the association is here. I love my car, right? I'm not a big car fan, but I do like my car, and I like the fact that it has all this automation built into it. When it rains, the wipers come on. When it gets dark, the lights come on automatically, and I like those little sort of technological helpers. The one thing that I don't like about it is this. It's got a mirror that will automatically dim when there's a bright light behind it. And it doesn't always get it right. Maybe if I'm a little bit tired, and I'm just a bit more sensitive to light, or I'm in a tunnel, or the car's headlights are a little bit too high behind me, or there's always some scenario where it's just not getting it right. And I wished for this mirror to be perfect, there would just simply be a little switch on it that would say, always dimmed, always not dimmed, or auto. Just so that I could turn around and tailor that, depending on what kind of state of mind or mood I'm in. This classic example of the manufacturer, the vendor, making a decision on my behalf, assuming that they know better than I do about when I want the light to be dimmed and when I don't want it to be dimmed. That's the fundamental principle of implementing flexible licensing. It's letting your customer make some choices. Don't always assume that you know best for them. Another part of it is getting the balance right. We've seen a few discussions around this topic, I think, in the last couple of days. It's about making sure that you've got the balance right between actually, David Wright, yesterday, HP, he made a great quote. He said, licensing stifles innovation. It's a great, great comment. Because basically licensing in general has a very, very bad reputation in the end user communities. It's just, and Amy, do you remember Amy's presentation this morning with the car, with check your license keys? Why is licensing being shoved in your face in that respect? I think that's the thing. You've got to get the balance right between protecting your assets and giving the end customer some freedom and letting them just get on with doing what they're supposed to be doing, using your software, getting value out of your software. And it's very, very important to get that balance right. So another conceptual slide is, licensing these days goes a really, really long way. There's all sorts of different types or concepts or flavors of licensing that we hear about being passed around. Single user, concurrent, volume, evaluation. There's so many different aspects or variations to licensing now, and it really just becomes almost a bit mind-boggling. The default approach that most vendors will take is keep it as simple as possible. Just go with a very basic approach to licensing, maybe just a couple of choices. We'll go with an evaluation license, and we'll go with a node-locked machine-based license or something like that, because it's simpler. It's just less overhead and less concern to worry about. And I think what we want the message to get across here is use the technology to give yourself the capability to actually offer any kind of license model. It doesn't matter don't worry about the complexity. The complexity is our job. We've got to worry about the complexity. Keep it easy, keep it simple, and just come up with a licensing scheme that's tailored to what the customer's asking for. Don't worry about it being a complex process. We've got tools in place, we've got the technology to simplify, rather to take away the complexities. The first step to this is getting packaging right. If you look in this scenario, we've got a product. And typically a product will be, a software application will be sliced up into different features or modules. So the first step is understanding what areas of functionality you want to split out and carve out and make as a licensable entity. So these are what we call the features. Once you've identified, and by the way, this slide, this could be an hour-long presentation in itself, right? So this is a very, very condensed view of packaging, for example. Dave, who did the presentation before me now, he could literally talk for 2 hours on this one slide quite easily. It's a very, very involved topic. So this is a condensed view. So once you've got your features defined, you can then start bundling these features up. And this is where our Ems platform comes in. Ems is our back office solution. It's like a licensing CRM, if you're not familiar with it. And it basically gives you many, many different areas of capability, including product activation. But what it also does is gives you the ability to start defining and bundling and packaging up features into different offerings and different packages. So once you've defined all these various different bundles, you could then associate license models to them. And there's a very important point here, that there's a big separation between what these bundles will look like and what the resultant license models will look like as well. So there's no mapping here. You could have this bundle, which is going to be using a time-based license, or a network license, or it could also be available in a usage-based model. You could have the other bundle, again, it can choose which license model it's going to choose. So you've got to keep the separation between the bundle structure and the license model choices. Don't have these things sort of tied together. That's a very important piece. And again, the architecture and the way the product catalog, as we call it, gets shaped in EMS is designed to support that, that way of working. As well as the license models, you've got the deployment models as well, and we're going to talk more about some of these deployment models, but you've got your electronic licenses, your license codes. You've got now, we're talking about cloud licensing. We're going to talk about that in a bit more detail. Okay, that's kind of the conceptual stuff done. I mean, like I said, those 3 slides, they could be a couple of hours worth. There's a lot of information that you can cover in those slides. So that was really just a snapshot, a very quick view over, of some of the things you should be thinking about. So some of these deployment scenarios, let's get into what these look like and how our technology sits alongside, sits within these scenarios. This is a very, very typical activation or software deployment scenario. You've got the vendor on the left-hand side. You've got the back office system, the license provisioning system, in this case, Sentinel EMS. What Sentinel EMS is doing is basically activating the endpoint, the user, the workstation, the device, whatever it may be. It's whatever the licensed entity is ultimately at the end of it all. This flow, this standard concept of licensing has been around for decades. It's used by the majority of software companies in the world, including the giants like Microsoft and all the rest of it. It's this one-to-one approach to licensing. Very, very common, very, very well known and very well understood. It does have drawbacks. The main drawback is that once that license has been issued, it's very difficult to get that license back or to change it or anything like that. It becomes more complex and cumbersome. If I'm the software vendor and I issue a license to a customer, maybe I need to change the license terms or something. Maybe they want an upgrade. Maybe it's just a short-term upgrade. Maybe I want to blacklist them. Maybe I want to, whatever contractual change takes place is normally reflected in the license date information that's on with the end customer. So there's something that might have changed. It's a complex process to then reflect that change in licensing in the actual technology. This exists with all of the licensing scenarios. It's kind of like a fire and forget mechanism. So what we've introduced to kind of help this is the license lease concept. This is where we introduce another component, this SCL box. This is basically it's another server component, another licensing endpoint that we've introduced. It sits out in the cloud. By the way, these are all sitting out in the cloud, these components. And what it does is it's almost like a proxy. Instead of providing a direct connection between the vendor and the application, it acts as a go-between between the 2 points. And what it's doing is it's providing a concept of a lease license. What a lease license basically is a very short-term license. It's like a short-term echo of the main license. That's probably a logical way of looking at it. Because the license, ultimately what the customers purchase, could be an annual license. It could be a perpetual license that lasts forever. But there's a concept of this lease, which basically means if there's an expectation that the application will go back home, phone home as we call it, and check to see if anything's changed. So it's a concept of dynamically updating that license or dynamically controlling that license. So you solve this problem of this whole sort of fire and forget scenario because the application is, let's think of a scenario. Maybe the vendor has decided to blacklist the license. To say you can't use that license anymore. The agreement's fallen apart, the end customer decided to stop paying. They want to terminate the license agreement. Normally, with a perpetual license that's delivered once, you can't do that very, very easily at all. With a license lease concept, you can just simply stop the renewals. So as a vendor, you can basically make you change the configuration inside EMS. So when this next lease goes down, it's actually a deactivated license rather than rather than a renewal of the existing license. Another scenario would be that. This is a classic one in licensing. Oh, I lost my machine. I lost my laptop. Sorry, I can't do anything now. I need a new license. You can't prove that they lost their laptop. You can't prove that they lost their machine. This is not even deactivating a license. This is like, we're going to go in good faith. Let's just send them out a new license. With this concept, you can just simply stop the lease renewal for the old laptop that they had and just transfer that lease renewal to the new laptop. So you've got complete control, far more control than you used to have. Some of the, by the way, this is what we call this is standalone deployments. It's a single user that's licensed in some way or another, either with a traditional license or with these now leased licenses. But it's a standard. We call it a standalone deployment. It's one license to one person, ultimately, or one entity. So some of the classic license models with standalone licensing, I think. Perpetual licenses, this is still by far the most common license in use in the world today is a perpetual license. License that goes out to a customer and stays with that customer. Subscription licenses, licenses which are renewed at an annual level or a monthly level, whatever that subscription term will be, but it's a license that the customer goes back and renews. That's a classic standalone license model. Evaluation licenses, I think we all know what these are. They usually are time-based. They're usually like a 30-day license or something like that, but they could be countdown based, as we call. You could say, okay, you can run the software for 30 times before you need to buy the purchased version. But eval licenses, they've been around for years and years. Everyone really knows what they are now. When you go back to having the connected licensing, as the green bar, as I talked about before, the green channel, you can start doing things like having a concept of global concurrency. You can't really do this very well with, you can't do it at all with traditional licensing because those licenses, once they're gone, they're gone. You can control the number of machines across the world that you'll activate, but you can't control the number of machines across the world that will actually be using that license at any one time. So maybe the customer buys, they're globally distributed, they're globally deployed, and you turn around and say, okay, well, we're going to sell you 3,000 licenses that you can use at any one time. So we'll talk about concurrency in a bit more in the next. And of course, the lease and renew concepts, you get this direct control of the license, you get the dynamic control. Lease and renew, it solves so many problems. It solves the whole, I lost my PC, it makes revoking the license so much easier than it was before. There's so many benefits that you get from this ability to have a near to real-time access to that license on the endpoint.
Question.
Yes, of course.
Differentiation between a subscription license, let's say an annual subscription license, and a one-year term license? Meaning, is there an assumption of renewal with a subscription or there's not with a term?
So at this level, there's no difference between the two. It's more of an accounting and billing difference. So a subscription or a term license needs to be renewed at some point, right? Technologically, that license is going to expire at the end of that defined, agreed period. So if it's an annual subscription, that license needs to be automatically renewed. Now, so a term, you basically you renegotiate the terms of the agreement at the end of that term. The subscription just keeps going all the time until you decide not to continue with it. Ultimately, it's still the same concept. It's a license that will expire, and it's whether that license is automatically renewed or intentionally renewed, basically. Okay. All right. Was that a question? No. So this is taking it to another level. This is what we call a network deployment. This is a very, very common scenario with enterprise or corporate domains, corporate environments, where the licenses are deployed within the local sort of network of the end customer. And those licenses are managed by, funnily enough, a license manager. We also call them a license server. And this is where our RMS component comes into the picture. So now we've got 3 of our technological components in here. Traditionally, RMS would also be interacting with EMS, getting a license, getting an activation in exactly the same way as a standalone workstation or device would be. Also, now that we've got the leased license, the connected license concept coming with SCL, with Sentinel Cloud Licensing, you can have the same principle, but it's a license manager that's the licensed entity, not a single individual component. What's the fundamental difference of a license manager being licensed? So the actual devices themselves, they need not know anything about activation or about connectivity or anything like that. That's the server that manages all that. These workstations are simply running within a corporate environment, within a domain, and they're asking the server for licenses when they need them. These are session-based licenses. These are typically licenses that are certainly they're concurrent floating licenses. If you're not familiar with a floating license, it's basically a license that when it's issued to the workstation will do whatever it needs to be doing. When the user shuts down that workstation or shuts down the application, the license is immediately given back to the server, back to a pool that the server's maintaining. The reason for that is then you can just share these licenses across. There may only be 20 seats that are purchased, but actually it's being used by up to 200 or 1,000 different workstations, but only 20 at any one time. So let's take a look at some of the additional models. I think when you get involved with network licensing, you really start opening up a Pandora's box of different licensing capabilities. And I think this is really where flexible licensing will absolutely come into the picture more with some of the technology that you can have through network licensing. So local concurrency, is enforcing that irrespective of anything that's going on online, that local concurrency limit gets enforced by the server. That floating concurrency limit. And then you can do things like reserve licenses, and you can share licenses. There's all sorts of additional rules. I'm not going to go into the details of all of these things in this presentation, but it's really just kind of just to get you thinking about all the different capabilities that are available. So let's take a slightly closer look at network licensing and what it can look like. You'll typically have something administrate. You'll have a administrator, someone that's monitoring these licenses, making sure these licenses are distributed accordingly. This is a very common IT admin role inside a corporate sort of environment or a corporate domain. The applications themselves, as I said, these applications know nothing about licensing. There's no licensing that's installed on these things anymore. It's just the software. All they're doing is simply interacting with the server. Like I said, that server could be reliant on a connection before it gives licenses out, but the applications don't need to know anything about any of that. So there's various concepts, and I'll touch on this fairly briefly. You've got various concepts like once you've got a network pool, a network distribution of licenses, you can have workstations disconnect or detach, commute out of that network, go off and do their own thing, and they basically, at least on a logical level, they're actually downloading a little instance of the rights that are in that license manager so that they can go off and basically have their own local license manager that they're using. There's tons of other concepts. Outage grace licensing, so if there is a problem on the network, you want to give the end customer a little bit more leeway about how the availability of the license is probably a good way of looking at it. If the network disappears, if their connection disappears, they can continue to use the license. It's giving them a lot more flexibility on how they can actually how they're enforced, I suppose. You can do shared sessions. There may be certain rules. The customer may turn around and say, oh, if I'm logging into the same machine with the same user details, that should be a single license. I don't want that. I don't want to be paying for 3 licenses in that case. It could be all members of the same team working on the same project. Actually, maybe there's grounds there to have that as a shared license. There's all sorts of different rules and policies and sort of scenarios, I think, that will make you think about how and when do we share a license versus enforce a one-to-one rule there. And then things like redundant servers. I think this is a really important one for network licensing as well. You've got with network licensing, because these applications don't have any licenses themselves, the server is the only piece that is responsible for keeping all these applications running. Because without the licenses, the applications are essentially not going to work. If the server goes down for some reason or whatever reason, you could end up with hundreds, if not thousands, of workstations just simply dropping out. So having server redundancy is a critical piece there, where you'll have multiple servers and they're monitoring each other, they're checking on each other's state and all that kind of stuff. Okay, the main point of this, and it's a complex and busy slide that kind of slowly gets busier over, as I click through it. The point is that all of this is from a single application. It's going back to what I said before. Is don't worry about the complexity. This is one application, whether it's a single user license, whether it's a grace-enabled shared license or anything like that. All of that complexity is pushed away from the application. It's all in the actual licensed components rather than in the software itself. But it basically means that it doesn't matter what your end customer is asking for. What model do they want? How do they want to use the software? They want to use it in a shared scenario. Do they want to do it in, go offline and use it offline and remotely, or whatever they want to do? You can say, yeah, okay, we can fulfill that requirement. Last thing I want to talk about, and this is a very condensed view of all of this stuff, by the way. This could be days and days of topics. So usage in itself is a fairly in-depth topic. So I'm just introducing the concept to you, really. So we talked about the connected licensing benefits. You're talking about this having this dynamic control, this ability to change stuff on the fly, to upgrade and downgrade and change license terms very, very easily with this callback mechanism, with this phone home mechanism. That same connection is also available to act as a transport mechanism for usage information. Usage has been problematic over the years. Usage has been around for a very long time. Applications have been able to track and record usage for a long, long time. For as long as licensing has been around, you have a concept of usage and licensing. No one's really adopted it because it's a real pain in the butt to get that usage information back to yourselves. For the customer to, a few vendors have tried this kind of successfully with agents or an email agreement where once a week you've got to email us your usage data, whatever it is. There's been various attempts over the years to try and solve this. But usage is a hugely popular model, but it just has a lot of complexity in setting it up, at least until now. So the benefits of having this connected licensing is that suddenly the the transport of usage data is much, much easier. It's almost transparent from that perspective. Very, very briefly, again, this is a much more involved topic, but the benefits of a usage-based metric model is it's platform agnostic. I don't mean it's like OS agnostic. It doesn't mean it's like, oh, Mac and Windows, you can use usage. It truly is platform agnostic. It doesn't matter if they're VMs, if they're mobile devices. I think you may have listened to Todd's IoT session. It could be an IoT device. It could be a cloud SaaS application. It's completely agnostic to the platform. Usage is a great model from that perspective because it doesn't matter what the platform itself is. It's a simple fact that end customers love paying as they go. If you ask any end customer how do they want to use your software, they would say, I want to pay as I go. It's very, very overwhelming response of them will say that. They love paying for what they use, ultimately. There's the favorites. Of course, there's the more conventional or traditional benefits of usage. These are probably much better well known than the first two. The customer insight, being able to understand how your customers are using the software, BI purposes. You can make decisions based upon, maybe there's a customer in Argentina that's using your software 10 times more than you assumed, or actually your software is so much more popular in South America than you realize. So you can launch a new marketing campaign in South America. So the BI aspects of usage are huge. But going back to the point that I made is that this has become available to everybody now with cloud. With connected licensing, the concept of usage is in everyone's hands. It's no longer, you don't have to go through this complex infrastructure setup and deployment to somehow put together a usage collection mechanism. With connected licensing, that usage data just sent back up to a central repository. It goes back up to this component is collecting that data and it organizes it and aggregates it. So as soon as these things are periodically going back online, they're synchronizing that data back up. And you can report, that's again, organized and collected. It goes to EMS, and EMS can report on that information. So you can run reports. You can basically get whatever view set you want of the usage that you want. So last slide. The main takeaways here. Use licensing.
Can I make another comment about usage?
Mm-hmm.
Real quick. One of the things that we learned from usage reporting is kind of why we did it, as a matter of fact, was now we don't care if our customers spin up like
Exactly.
1,000 instances in Amazon and run our product. It's like if you pay us as you go, we don't care about the number of instances you bring up. So it's nice to not concern yourself anymore with like all these issues of VMs and,
exactly right.
and instances and highly variable workloads and things like that. So, so that's proven to be really important.
It's a great comment. It switched. So it was only a few years ago, we were trying to discourage people from even using software on VMs, right? Because they were the risk of misuse. This is like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we were saying this. Now it's like, spin up as many as you like, the more the merrier. Because if it's, as you say, if it's a usage model, then more revenue.
We actually make a special version of our client that we give away for free, but only if you use it with a metered model.
Right.
So if you run it non-metered, we make you pay us $1,000 for it. But if you run it with metered, we give it to you for free because it's like, matter of fact, we let you use it with anybody that's metered because those customers are paying us as we go.
Yeah.
It's kind of given us more permission to give like stuff away, sort of.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
The customer believes they're getting more value because they usually are, but the reality is, there's far less money being left on the table with it.
So what are the mechanisms or the gentleman agreement if the customer is using maintenance solution but it's not connected to the system? How long you wait or how do you shut this customer down once you figure that out?
Yeah, it depends on the industry, right? So usually on a month is probably a fairly decent grace for that. Many of the customers that we know that are doing this in a manual or offline way is they will get monthly reports, and if they don't get that report that month, they'll give them a month to send both sets of reports, and if they don't, they'll shut them down. It's fairly loose, right? 2 months.
With the SCL solution, there is a way to turn off the license without being connected to the internet?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, without being connected to the internet?
Yeah.
No, you need to, that will have to be reflected in the next. So if that data stops coming up, is there something here automatically that now you'd need to send something back, to turn it off.
Or you can have to negotiate. Well, if you want to pay as you go, one of the agreements is you agree to be connected.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you can't have it.
Absolutely. Exactly right. Yeah. Most customers will be absolutely fine with that because they get more value out of a usage-based model.
You have to be connected.
Yeah, right, exactly, exactly. All right, last few, just one more slide just to cover the final takeaways. You know, it's about turning licensing into a tool for customer enablement, right? Not as, they don't, I hate the fact that so many customers see licensing as a ball and chain, right? There's enough capability, there's enough tools in licensing to make this something that the customer actually sees as a benefit for them, not as a hindrance for them. This is, you know, ask us about it, right? Because, you know, we know that this can be done. Fundamental to that is letting your customers have more choice. There's no need to put so many restrictions on the customers just because it seems too complex. The technology is designed to do the complex work, as I said, and trying to take that complexity away from you. Separate licensing and bundling away from the actual software. The software need not know anything about licensing on a technological level. It's just the software. Put all the licensing logic and all that stuff outside of the software. And this is, to me, I mean, I've been working in licensing for so many years, and I've heard about usage and people really wanting to do usage, and I've heard about all the pain points of why usage was so frustrating to think, if only there was an easy way of doing usage. You know, with connected licensing, usage truly is now easy. You know, this is a huge change in the way licensing is being offered to customers thanks to the connected world. All right. Good timing. Was that the time to stop? Time to stop mode? Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you.